Please help my mama. The bear's hurting her." The cry tore through the cold Oregon rain like lightning splitting the night. A tiny barefoot girl stumbled out of the dark forest and onto the slick highway, her voice trembling, her breath catching between sobs. 5-year-old Amara Jean-Baptiste, her thin frame wrapped in a torn pink hoodie, ran toward a line of motorcycles parked under the dim glow of a truck stop sign. The downpour drenched her curls until they clung to her forehead, her small hands shaking as she waved for help. Her feet slapped against the wet pavement, splashing through puddles that mirrored the red and white glow of tail lights. Her brown eyes, wide, frantic, innocent, reflected nothing but terror. Across the lot, 50 men stood under the awning of the diner, their leather vests glistening in the rain. The sound of engines idling low blended with the hiss of water against chrome. One of the men turned, frowning through the storm. Another muttered, "What the hell?" Then the largest of them, broad shoulders, gray-streaked beard, tattoos curling down his arms, stepped forward. His name was Mason "Grizzly" Kane, president of the Hell Angels Oregon chapter. His presence alone carried the weight of command. He removed his helmet slowly, squinting through the mist as the little girl stumbled toward him. "What did you say, sweetheart?" he called out over the rain. Amara's voice broke between gasps. "The bear, it's hurting my mama. Please, please help her." For a second, nobody spoke. The wind howled through the trees. Then Mason's jaw tightened. He knelt, rain dripping from his beard, eyes locked on hers. "Where is she, kid?" Amara turned and pointed toward the black mass of forest behind her. Lightning flashed, briefly revealing the outline of trees swaying like giants in the wind. "She's there. The bear came, and she told me to run." The men exchanged uneasy glances. The bear attack? In this weather? But something in the child's trembling voice, raw, desperate, undeniable, cut through doubt. Mason rose to his full height. "No kid lies like that," he said quietly. Then louder, "Gear up, boys." The other bikers moved without question. Boots splashed through puddles, helmets snapped on, headlights flickered to life. One by one, the 50 motorcycles roared, their engines blending into a single thunderous growl that shook the ground. Amara flinched at the sound, but Mason's hand rested gently on her shoulder. "We'll find her, sweetheart," he said. "You did good coming to us." He lifted her onto the back of a parked bike under the diner awning, where one of the riders' wives, Tammy, wrapped her in a leather jacket. "You stay right here, sugar," she whispered. "We got your mama." The last thing Amara saw before the bike sped off was a blur of headlights cutting through rain and darkness. 50 men riding into a storm, chasing a cry for help from a child they'd never met. But before those engines ever thundered into the forest, before the rain turned a mother's fear into a fight for survival, the day had begun like any other for Mary Jean-Baptiste, a woman who had already weathered storms of her own. The sun had barely lifted above the Oregon pines when the smell of diesel and coffee filled the Restway Diner on Highway 58. The breakfast crowd was thin, mostly truckers, loggers, and travelers passing through, but the clatter of plates and hum of an old radio made the place feel alive. In the back kitchen, Mary stood at the sink, steam curling around her tired face. She was 28 but looked older, her eyes dulled by sleepless nights. Once, in Port-au-Prince, she had been a skilled cook, running a small food stand with her husband. But after he was killed during a robbery, she had taken her daughter and fled to the United States, hoping for safety. Safety had not come easily. Now she worked washing dishes for tips, her hands cracked from detergent, her nails chipped from scrubbing. The other staff rarely spoke to her except to hand her more plates. But she hummed softly under her breath, a Creole lullaby her mother had sung to her long ago. It was her armor against despair. Outside, in the corner of the diner's parking lot, Her daughter Amara waited by their rusted white van. The windows were fogged from the damp morning air, and inside, a small pile of blankets and stuffed animals marked it as their home. Amara sat cross-legged on a crate, drawing in the dirt with a broken blue crayon. When Mary finally stepped outside after her shift, the light drizzle had begun again. She smiled faintly as Amara ran to her. "Mama, look, I drew you cooking again," the girl said proudly, holding up a paper damp with raindrops. It showed a stick figure stirring a pot, smiling. Mary crouched down, brushing the child's cheek. "It's beautiful, Sherry. One day, you'll draw me in a real kitchen again." Amara's eyes lit up. "And I'll help. I'll make pancakes." Mary laughed softly. "Yes, my little chef." They shared a small sandwich for dinner, a piece of ham, some bread, and half an apple. Mary gave Amara the bigger half. When the child asked if they could go to a motel tonight, Mary hesitated, looking toward the diner's neon sign flickering in the distance. She had earned only $23 that day. "Soon, my love," she whispered. "Soon, we'll have a bed and a light that doesn't go out." That night, they parked the van deeper in the forest to stay hidden from highway patrol. Mary spread out the blankets, kissed her daughter's forehead, and whispered, "Dormi bien, Sherry. Sleep well." As the rain began to fall, Amara drifted off to the sound of her mother's humming. Mary sat by the van window, staring into the dark woods. Her heart ached with both fear and hope, the same ache she had carried since leaving Haiti. She didn't know that just beyond those trees, something hungry was already moving. Welcome to Tales of an Observer, where truth, dignity, and courage meet in the stories we can't afford to forget. Now, before we get deep into the story, I would love to request a little favor from you. Please hit that subscribe button, like this video, and leave a comment telling me the city where you're watching from around the world. And also, please share this story with your loved ones. Now, let's get back into the story and see what unfolds. By midnight, the forest was alive with sound. The storm had grown wilder, and the van rocked gently in the wind. Mary stirred, hearing a faint rustle outside. She thought it was the rain, or maybe raccoons digging through trash. But then came another noise. Heavy, slow, breathing. She froze. The sound circled the van, sniffing, snorting. Then a deep growl rolled through the air, low and guttural, vibrating through the metal walls. Mary's heart stopped. She turned toward her sleeping daughter and whispered, "Pas fait bruit, Sherry, don't make a sound." Outside, something scraped against the van door. And then, silence. A silence so deep it pressed against her chest like a warning. Because out there, in the black rain-soaked woods, the bear had found them. Mary's breath came shallow and quick. She could hear it pacing outside, massive paws squelching in the mud. Each exhale was a growl of its own, steaming in the cold. She dared to peek through the small crack between the curtains. What she saw made her knees weaken. A black bear, larger than any she had ever imagined, lumbered in the beam of the van's dim headlight. Its fur dripped with rain, glistening like oil. Its snout pressed to the window, leaving streaks of moisture and fog as it sniffed for food. Mary's stomach twisted. They'd eaten earlier, a small can of beans and half a loaf of bread. The empty can sat on the ground outside, where she'd tossed it. Its scent must have drawn the animal in. Amara stirred beside her, her tiny fingers clutching the blanket. "Mama?" she whispered groggily. "Shoo," Mary breathed, pressing a trembling finger to her lips. "Ready tranquille. Stay still, baby." Lightning flashed again, briefly lighting the forest. The bear flinched, then turned its head back toward the van. A low, hungry rumble rolled from its throat. Mary reached for a rusted metal pot beside the tiny camp stove, her hand shaking. Maybe noise could scare it away. She'd heard that once, somewhere. "God, please," she muttered under her breath. Just leave us alone. She raised the pot and struck it with a spoon. The sharp clang cut through the storm. The bear froze. For one suspended second, hope flickered. Then came a deafening snarl as it reared on its hind legs, slamming its paws against the van. The entire vehicle shuddered violently, rocking side to side. Amara screamed. The windows rattled as Mary grabbed her daughter and pulled her close. It's okay, baby. It's okay. But it wasn't. Another impact, harder this time, sent one of the side mirrors snapping off. The bear roared again, enraged. Its claws scraped metal, peeling paint as though tearing paper. Mary's instincts took over. She grabbed the kitchen knife from her cooking bag, gripping it with both hands. Stay under the blanket, she hissed. Don't move. Amara ducked beneath the old coat piled near the seat, sobbing. Mary opened the back door slightly, just enough to see the creature clearly now that lightning struck again. It was close, its eyes glowing like embers in the dark. Its breath was hot and foul, filling the air with the smell of blood and rain-soaked fur. She swung the pot again, screaming, "Get away! Go!" The sound only made it angrier. The bear lunged, slamming into the door with such force that it flung open. Mary stumbled back, hitting the metal floor hard. "Mama!" Amara cried. Mary's knife slipped from her hand. She scrambled for it, but the bear's paw came down, claws tearing into the doorframe. The animal bellowed, swiping blindly at the noise and motion. Mary's pulse pounded in her ears. She grabbed a broken stick from the pile of kindling they'd gathered earlier and swung it wildly, striking the bear across the muzzle. It wasn't enough to hurt it, but enough to make it hesitate. "Go!" she shouted again, tears streaking her face. "Go away!" The bear growled louder, its body wedging against the door. Its claws tore through the metal like foil, slashing across Mary's forearm. She screamed in pain as blood ran down to her wrist. For a moment, everything was chaos, rain hammering the roof, thunder cracking overhead, the child's screams mixing with the beast's roar. Mary staggered backward, clutching her arm. The bear loomed, filling the doorway, its massive head swinging side to side. And then instinct, raw, ancient, maternal, took over. She turned to Amara, who was frozen in the corner, eyes wide and wet. "Run, Amara!" Mary shouted. "Run now! Go find help!" Amara shook her head violently, crying, "No, Mama! Run!" The bear roared again, snapping its jaws, inches away. Mary swung the stick once more, hitting its nose. "Go!" she screamed. Amara hesitated for one final heartbeat, then bolted. She leaped from the van's side door into the rain, her small feet splashing through mud as lightning illuminated the trees ahead. "Keep running!" Mary cried, her voice breaking. "Don't look back!" The bear lunged forward again. Mary grabbed the knife from the floor and slashed upward, striking its shoulder. It bellowed, thrashing violently, hitting her hard against the van wall. Pain exploded through her chest. The blade fell from her hand. She gasped, her vision swimming, as the creature reared again. Outside, she could faintly hear her daughter's voice, small and fading into the storm, calling for help. Mary's heart clenched. That sound kept her conscious, kept her fighting. She crawled backward, clutching her bleeding arm, whispering through gritted teeth, "You won't touch her." With a final surge of strength, she snatched the pot again and hurled it at the bear's head. The clang echoed through the trees. The bear roared and backed away briefly, shaking its massive head. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the scene, the mother trembling in blood and rain, the van door hanging open, the animal's shadow cast huge against the trees. Then, in the next instant, the bear charged once more. Mary threw herself sideways, hitting the muddy ground outside the van. The cold bit her skin, her breath shallow and ragged. She could hear the beast inside now, sniffing, searching, tossing things around. The van groaned under its weight. She tried to crawl away, but her body screamed in pain. Her vision blurred from exhaustion and blood loss. Somewhere beyond the trees, she thought she heard engines, low, distant rumbles echoing through the storm. Or maybe it was thunder. She couldn't tell. The rain came harder, a curtain of silver slicing through the night. Mary pressed her palms into the mud and dragged herself a few feet away from the van. Her knees gave out, and she fell onto her side. She looked toward the forest trail Amara had taken. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Please let them find her." The bear emerged from the van, furious, its fur matted with rain and debris. It turned toward her again, nostrils flaring. Mary's breath hitched. She grabbed the nearest branch, a jagged stick half buried in the mud. "Come on," she whispered to herself. "If I die tonight, I die fighting." The bear advanced, slow and deliberate, its massive head swinging low. Lightning illuminated its wet fur, glistening like obsidian. She raised the branch high. "Come on, you monster," she cried. "Come for me." The beast charged. She swung, connecting with its snout once more, but it barely slowed. Its paw lashed out, striking her shoulder. She screamed, stumbling back, collapsing into the mud. The world tilted and dimmed around her. Thunder cracked above them, loud, endless. The bear reared again. Mary's mind flickered with images, her daughter's laughter, the smell of bread baking back home, the lullaby her mother once sang under Haitian rain. Her lips moved without sound. "Bondi, sauve petit mwen. God save my child." Another roar split the forest. The sound of claws against metal rang out again. Then lightning flashed one final time, searing the sky. The bear's shadow loomed over her, black against the silver light. Her scream echoed through the trees, swallowed by thunder. And far down the highway, where the neon lights of the truck stop flickered in the storm, a child's cry reached the ears of 50 bikers who would soon ride into that darkness. The storm was a wall of water and wind, pounding against the black highway. Little Amara Jean-Baptiste ran with all the strength her tiny body could muster. Her bare feet slapped against the soaked asphalt, splashing through puddles that felt like ice. Every breath tore through her chest like fire. Behind her, the forest howled with wind and rain, and the faint, awful sound of her mother's screams still echoed in her head. "Mama," she sobbed, glancing back once. The woods were a blur of shadows and lightning. She tripped, fell hard on her knees, then pushed herself up again. Her hands were slick with mud. Her left shoe, the only one she'd had torn apart somewhere in the scramble. Her right foot was bleeding. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Ahead, through the heavy rain, she saw lights, flickering red and orange, cutting through the mist. A truck stop. She stumbled toward it, crying out, her small voice breaking against the roar of thunder. "Help! Please!" The world seemed too big for her cry. But she kept going. When she reached the edge of the lot, her legs finally gave out. She fell onto the wet gravel, panting, clutching her chest. The neon sign above her flickered weakly, "Restway Truck Stop, open 24 hours." Through the rain, she saw them, a line of motorcycles parked in a neat row under the awning, chrome shining under the lights. Their engines rumbled softly, the smell of fuel and leather heavy in the air. 50 men, huge, broad, weathered, stood near the diner, laughing, smoking, shaking rain from their jackets. The Hell Angels, unmistakable in their vests of black and red. Amara blinked through the rain, terrified but desperate. They looked dangerous. Tattoos, scars, heavy boots, but they were the only people she could see. She forced herself to stand. "Please," she tried to say, but her throat was raw. Please help me. One of the men, a tall biker with a bandana over his face, noticed first. What the? He muttered, tapping another on the shoulder. Yo, Kane, you see that? All heads turned. The men went quiet as the small figure stumbled toward them, soaked through, shivering, her torn pink hoodie clinging to her body. Her hair was matted, her lips blue from cold. She reached the edge of the awning and stopped, trembling. Her voice came out in gasps. Please, help my mama, the bear's hurting her. The silence that followed was deafening. The biggest man among them stepped forward, Mason Grizzly Kane. His gray-streaked beard glistened with rain, and his eyes, sharp as flint, softened the instant he saw her. He crouched down, his massive frame folding carefully so he could look her in the eye. What did you say, little one? He asked, his voice deep but gentle. The bear, Amara sobbed, her accent breaking through. It's hurting my mama, in the woods. A few of the men exchanged uncertain looks. One snorted under his breath. A bear? Kid must be. But before he could finish, Amara lifted her hand. Her sleeve was torn and smeared with blood, her mother's blood. The sight froze everyone. Mason's jaw tightened. His eyes darkened with something like fury. No kid lies like that, he said quietly. Then, standing, he turned toward his crew. Gear up, boys. No one argued. Helmets snapped on. Jackets zipped. Boots hit the ground in perfect rhythm. 50 engines flared to life, their growls rolling through the storm like thunder from the earth itself. Amara flinched at the noise, stepping back in fear. Mason turned to her again, his voice steady. You did good coming here, sweetheart, he said. We'll find your mama. He gestured to one of the bikers, a woman with short blonde hair and a scar across her cheek. Tammy, the medic of the group. Stay with her, he ordered. Get her warm. Tammy knelt beside Amara, wrapping a thick leather jacket around her small shoulders. It's okay, baby girl, she whispered, rubbing her back. You're safe now. Amara's tears mixed with rain as she looked up at the giant man turning toward the forest. Please hurry, she whispered. Mason gave a single nod. We will. Within moments, the truck stopped transformed. Men strapped flashlights to their handlebars, loaded emergency flares, chains, and crowbars into side compartments. Some checked their sidearms, not to kill, but to scare if needed. The rain hammered down harder, the sound of engines growing louder and louder until the very air shook. One of the riders shouted over the noise, Boss, you sure about this? A bear in the middle of nowhere? It's suicide. Mason turned his head slightly, water dripping from his beard. You hear that, girl? The man nodded. Then you know what we're doing, Mason said. You don't ignore a cry like that. That shut everyone up. He swung a leg over his massive Harley, revving the engine once. A thunderclap that seemed to split the sky. Let's ride, he roared. And then they moved. The convoy of motorcycles tore out of the lot like a wave of noise and light. Headlights pierced the downpour, casting beams through the misty highway. Water sprayed up from the tires as they accelerated, 50 strong, the roar of their engines echoing into the night. Inside the diner, a few truckers pressed their faces to the glass, watching in disbelief. What the hell's going on? One muttered. Hell angels ridin' in a storm? Said another. That's gotta be bad news. But outside, Mason and his men were already gone, streaks of chrome and thunder fading into the darkness. Back at the truck stop, Tammy guided Amara inside. The diner's lights felt too bright, too warm. She helped the child sit in a booth near the window, wrapping her hands around a steaming mug of cocoa. Amara's eyes were wide, her small body trembling. Will they find her? She whispered. Tammy looked toward the rain-smeared glass. If anyone can, it's them, she said softly. Grizzly's been riding these roads 30 years. He's got a sense for danger. Amara nodded weakly, trying to believe it. Her fingers tightened around the mug. Meanwhile, the storm swallowed the convoy whole. Mason led the front, his headlights cutting through sheets of rain. He knew these woods, he'd ridden past them 100 times, but tonight they felt different. The trees loomed, branches bending under the storm's weight. They reached the dirt road leading toward the forest clearing. Mud splashed against their boots, the tires slipping slightly on the incline. "Cut the noise," Mason signaled with his hand. The riders slowed, engines growling low as the rain muffled everything else. They could barely see more than 20 feet ahead. Then Mason spotted it, a faint glimmer of metal through the trees. "Over there," he shouted. They turned sharply down a narrow path. The light revealed a rusted van, its side door hanging open, one tire flattened. The ground was torn up, claw marks gouged into the mud. Blood streaked the dirt. Mason cut his engine, dismounting slowly. The others followed, their boots sinking into the wet ground. "Jesus," one murmured. "What the hell happened here?" Mason crouched by the van door, his flashlight sweeping the interior. The seats were ripped, a pot lay dented on the floor, and the faint smell of blood and animal musk filled the air. "Fresh," he muttered. "Whatever did this is still close." A few of the men drew their weapons, pipes, chains, and one had a flare gun ready. Mason raised a hand. "No noise unless I say so." He moved forward, scanning the tree line. Rain dripped from his hair, mixing with mud on his boots. Every instinct in him screamed that they weren't alone. And then they heard it, a faint moan. "Human! Over there!" They rushed toward the sound, beams of light slicing through the darkness. The ground sloped down toward a shallow ditch, where something moved weakly among the ferns. It was a woman, soaked, bleeding, barely conscious. Mason knelt beside her, brushing wet hair from her face. Her eyes fluttered open. "Easy," he said softly. "You're safe now." Mary blinked up at him, confused, her voice barely a whisper. "Amara." "She found us," Mason said. "She's safe." Tears mixed with rain as Mary's eyes closed again, exhaustion pulling her under. Mason looked up, his expression hard. "She's alive," he said. "We need to move now." But before anyone could respond, a sound broke through the rain, deep, guttural, and close. The men froze. From the shadows beyond the clearing came a growl that shook the earth. Two glowing eyes glinted between the trees. Mason rose slowly, pulling a chain from his belt. "Guess we found our bear," he said grimly. The riders formed a semicircle around him, engines revving low, headlights aimed toward the trees. The rain turned silver under their beams. "On my mark," Mason growled. "We don't run. We make it run." Thunder cracked overhead as the bear stepped into the light, enormous, soaked, enraged. And 50 Hell Angels tightened their grips, their engines roaring louder than the storm. For the first time that night, the predators of the road had become protectors of the innocent. The rain fell harder now, a relentless torrent beating against the trees. The world had shrunk to darkness, thunder, and pain. Mary Jean-Baptiste lay half-conscious in the mud beside her ruined van. Her arm throbbed where the bear's claws had torn through flesh. The cold seeped into her bones. Every breath came shallow, quick, desperate. The forest was alive with sound, branches cracking, wind howling, rain slapping against leaves, but through it all, she could still hear the bear. That low, steady rumble that vibrated in her chest. It was still there. She turned her head weakly. Through the blur of rain and blood, she saw its massive shadow moving just beyond the broken headlights of the van. Its fur gleamed black and wet, its snout glistening red. It circled slowly, its heavy paws sinking into the soaked earth. Her vision swam. She thought of her daughter, of little Amara, running barefoot through the storm. Her baby's cry still echoed faintly in her ears. "Run, my love," she whispered weakly. "Find help, please." The bear growled again, lower this time. Its patience was thinning. It turned its head toward her and began to move forward, each step sending shivers through the ground. Mary tried to push herself up, but her body betrayed her. Her hands slipped in the mud, her arms seared with pain. The beast stopped a few feet away, sniffing the air. The wind shifted, carrying her scent straight to it. Mary's pulse pounded in her ears. "No," she whispered. "Not like this." The bear lunged, and then a burst of white flooded the clearing, slicing through the rain and darkness. Headlights. Dozens of them. The bear recoiled, blinking against the sudden brightness. The sound came next, engines. 50 roaring engines that shook the trees and rattled the ground. The forest exploded with thunder that didn't come from the sky. Mary blinked, trying to focus. What she saw didn't seem real. A line of motorcycles surged through the narrow path, tires splashing through mud, engines growling like wild beasts of their own. Riders dismounted in a blur of motion, black leather, shining chains, helmets gleaming under the downpour. The Hell Angels had arrived. At the front of the charge, Mason, Grizzly, Kane swung off his bike, chain already wrapped around his arm. Rain streamed down his beard as his eyes locked on the monster before them. "Circle it," he bellowed over the engines. "Keep her behind me." The men moved instantly, spreading out in a semicircle around the bear and the fallen woman. Engines revved louder, tires spinning against the wet ground. Flashlights mounted on helmets flicked on, cutting through the rain in blinding beams. The bear snarled, confused by the light and noise. One of the riders, a heavy-set man named Reaper, revved his bike again, the roar echoing through the clearing. Another swung a chain through the air, the metal whistling as it cut through rain. The bear turned its head from one to another, disoriented. It growled again, rising on its hind legs, towering over them all. "Holy hell," someone muttered. "Stay tight." Mason shouted, "We make it run." The bear roared, a deafening, furious sound that made even the bikers flinch. Then it charged. Mason didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, swinging the chain with all his strength. The metal snapped across the bear's shoulder with a sharp crack. The beast howled in pain and fury. "Now!" Mason shouted. Engines revved to their limits, a wall of noise so loud it swallowed the thunder. The men shouted, waving torches and pipes, slamming metal against metal. Sparks flew, headlights flared, and the forest seemed to come alive with fire and fury. The bear spun, trying to find a direction to flee, but everywhere it turned, there was noise, light, motion. Mary, still lying in the mud, stared in disbelief. Her body trembled, not just from pain, but from awe. These men, these strangers, had come for her. The bear backed toward the trees, snapping at the lights. Mason kept moving closer, one hand gripping the chain, the other signaling to his crew. "Don't shoot it unless you have to," he shouted. "Just scare it off." One man raised a flare gun and fired into the air. The flare burst into bright red light, painting the forest in flame. The bear reared back, roaring again, its eyes reflecting the glow like molten gold. Then, with a violent snarl, it turned and crashed through the undergrowth, tearing a path back into the woods. The noise faded slowly, branches breaking, leaves rustling, until the only sound left was the rain and the hum of engines. No one moved for several seconds. Then Mason exhaled. "It's gone," he said, his voice rough but calm. "It's over." He dropped the chain to the ground and turned toward the woman lying near the van. "Get the medic," he barked. Tammy and 2 others rushed forward. Mason knelt beside Mary, who was shivering uncontrollably, her arm bleeding badly. Her eyes fluttered open. "Amara," she whispered weakly. "She's safe," Mason said firmly. "She found us." "You did good, ma'am." A tear slipped down her cheek, mixing with the rain. "You came?" Mason pulled off his leather jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. The jacket was far too large, but it swallowed her in warmth. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe now." Mary blinked up at him through the blur of rain. For the first time that night, she saw something she hadn't seen in anyone's eyes for a long time: kindness. Her body gave out. She collapsed forward, unconscious, into his arms. "Easy," Mason murmured, steadying her. "I got you." Tammy knelt beside them, checking her pulse. "She's weak, but she's alive," she said. "We need to get her warm fast." "Truck stops 5 miles back," another rider said. "We can haul her in the van." Van's shot. Mason cut in, glancing at the wreckage. "We'll take her on the bikes. We do this careful." The men nodded, springing into motion. One fetched blankets from a saddlebag, another cleared debris from the road. 2 more grabbed spare tarps to shield her from the rain. Mason lifted Mary easily, cradling her like a child. She was light, too light. He carried her toward his bike, his boots sinking into the mud with each step. "Someone grab that pot and the kids' drawings," he said without looking back. "They'll want them." Reaper smirked faintly. "You're turning soft, boss." "Shut up and move," Mason replied. The engines roared again, echoing through the drenched forest like victory drums. For a moment, under the wash of headlights and rain, the scene froze in time. 50 bikers standing guard around a wounded mother, their leather jackets glistening like armor. Power had become protection. Fury had become mercy. As they prepared to leave, Mason took one last look into the dark forest. He could still hear faint movements, the bear retreating deeper into the woods. It was alive, and for now that was enough. He whispered to himself, "You stay wild and we'll stay gone." He swung onto his bike, settling Mary gently against his chest, wrapping his arm around her to keep her steady. "Hang on, sweetheart," he murmured. "We're taking you home." The engines roared once more. Headlights flared. And as they rode out of the clearing, rain cascading down like silver curtains, the sound of thunder followed them, not from the sky, but from the road itself. Behind them, the forest slowly fell silent again, the echo of their engines fading into the storm. Back at the truck stop, through the diner window, Amara sat huddled in the booth, staring into the rain. Every thunderclap made her flinch. Tammy sat beside her, one arm around her shoulders, whispering soft words she could barely hear. Then, in the distance, the first glow of headlights appeared, faint, then growing brighter, 50 beams cutting through the storm. "They're coming," Tammy said quietly. Amara pressed her palms to the glass. "Mama?" The motorcycles pulled into the lot, engines slowing but still rumbling. Mason was the first to stop. He swung off his bike, still holding Mary. She was pale, wrapped in his jacket, but breathing. The child burst from the diner before anyone could stop her. "Mama!" she cried, sprinting into the rain. Mary stirred weakly in Mason's arms, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw her daughter, her lips trembled into the faintest smile. Mason knelt, lowering her gently so mother and daughter could meet halfway. Amara threw herself against her mother, sobbing. "I found them, Mama. I found the angels." Mary held her close, too weak to speak, her tears lost in the rain. Mason stood behind them, silent, his expression unreadable. Around him, the Hell Angels watched in quiet awe. For all their noise and iron and fire, this moment was the loudest thing they'd ever felt in their lives. That night, the Oregon forest had seen a different kind of battle, not one fought for pride or vengeance, but for mercy. And for the first time in a long while, angels wore leather and rode on steel. The rain had finally begun to fade, though thunder still rolled softly across the Oregon hills. The forest clearing was a battlefield, mud churned, branches broken, headlights cutting through steam rising from the drenched ground. 50 motorcycles idled in a semicircle, their beams flickering across the wrecked van, the churned soil, and the exhausted figures huddled at its center. Mary Jean-Baptiste sat wrapped in Mason Kane's leather jacket, her skin pale, her hair plastered to her face. Her right arm was bandaged roughly with a torn flannel shirt. Tammy, the biker medic, worked fast, muttering under her breath as she tied off the last strip of cloth. "Pressure's good," Tammy said, glancing up. "She's lucky." Mary blinked slowly, trying to focus. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Where's my little girl?" Mason crouched in front of her, rain dripping from his beard. "She's safe," he said gently. "Back at the diner. Waiting for you." Tears filled Mary's eyes. Her lips trembled. "You came for me, you saved me." Mason shook his head. "Your daughter saved you," he said. "We just followed her lead." She managed a faint smile before her head dipped forward in exhaustion. The forest around them had gone eerily still. The bear was gone, vanished into the storm. Only the deep grooves in the mud and claw marks on the van proved it had ever been there. But the peace didn't last long. From the highway came a sudden wash of red and blue light. Sirens cut through the rain. Police cruisers and animal control trucks pulled up, their tires spitting water as they rolled to a stop. "Great," Reaper muttered. "Here comes the cavalry." The flashing lights painted the trees in streaks of color, red, blue, white, until the whole clearing looked surreal. Officers stepped out, their hands hovering near their holsters. "What the hell happened here?" one of them called out, his flashlight swinging across the group of leather-clad bikers. Mason raised a hand calmly. "Bear attack. Woman's hurt. We handled it." "You handled it?" The officer's disbelief was audible even through the rain. "Yeah," Mason said, his tone flat. "You're welcome." Tammy glared at the officer. "You can point your light at the blood if you need proof." The cop hesitated, then motioned to the paramedics to move in. They rushed to Mary, checking her pulse and transferring her onto a stretcher. Mason stepped back, giving them space. His hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from the adrenaline finally wearing off. The storm had passed, but inside, it was still raging. As the emergency crews worked, a new set of headlights appeared at the far end of the road, civilian cars. A few onlookers had followed the flashing lights, drawn by curiosity and the lingering fear that something terrible had happened. And among them, unnoticed at first, was a man with a camera mounted on his dashboard. He had seen everything, from the roar of the motorcycles to the blinding flare that sent the bear fleeing. By dawn, that footage would flood every social media feed in America. At the truck stop diner, Amara sat huddled in the booth, clutching a mug of cold cocoa. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Tammy sat beside her, one arm draped protectively around the little girl. Then the door burst open. The first thing Amara saw was the stretcher, her mother's face pale under the diner lights. "Mama," she cried, scrambling from the booth. Mary lifted her good arm, weak but steady. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." The child threw herself into her mother's side, hugging her so tightly the medics had to pause their work. Mason stood just outside the diner door, drenched, his jaw tight as he watched the reunion. The flashing lights from police cars cast strange shadows across his face. One of the officers approached him. "You the one in charge here?" Mason nodded. The officer flipped his notebook open. Name? Mason Kane, he said, voice low. People call me Grizzly. You part of the Hell Angels? Mason glanced toward his men. They were leaning against their bikes, lighting cigarettes, quiet for once. Yeah, he said. All of us. The officer raised a brow. So let me get this straight. 50 Hell Angels rode into a forest in the middle of a storm to fight a bear. Mason's expression didn't change. That's about right. The officer looked skeptical, scribbling in his notebook. You expect me to believe that? Mason's eyes hardened. I don't care what you believe, officer. That little girl came to us crying her mama was dying. You think we were gonna sit around and check IDs? The cop said nothing. The sound of rain filled the pause between them. Didn't think so, Mason said, turning away. By morning, the rain had stopped completely. Mist clung to the treetops as the sun broke through in faint orange light. The forest smelled of wet earth and gasoline. The medics loaded Mary into the ambulance. She reached for Amara, her fingers brushing the girl's cheek. Don't be afraid, my love, she whispered. Mama's okay now. Amara nodded through tears. The angels saved us. The words made Mason pause. He looked down at the little girl and gave a faint smile. You're a brave one, he said. You keep that heart strong. She smiled up at him, her voice tiny. Thank you, Mr. Angel. Mason chuckled softly. Never been called that before. News travels faster than thunder. By the time the ambulance reached the hospital, the story had already begun to spread. Truckers who had witnessed the scene posted shaky phone videos. The dashcam footage hit social media an hour later. The headline appeared across screens nationwide. 50 Hell Angels fight off wild bear to save homeless mother and child. Within hours, millions had watched it, the blinding headlights, the circling bikes, the roar of engines as the beast turned and fled. Comment sections filled with disbelief. These are the same Hell Angels that got banned from 3 states? Can't believe I'm saying this, but that's heroic. Maybe angels wear leather after all. At the diner, a local news van arrived before sunrise. Reporters swarmed the lot, shoving microphones toward anyone in a leather jacket. Were you there? Did you actually see the bear? Why did you risk your lives for strangers? Most of the bikers ignored them. A few smirked. One man, chewing on a toothpick, said, "Guess we're soft after all." But Mason stayed quiet. He stood beside his bike, his leather jacket streaked with mud, eyes still fixed on the forest as if he could hear the echo of that night. A reporter finally approached him. "Mr. Kane, can we get a comment? The world's calling you heroes." Mason looked at her for a long moment, then said simply, "A child screamed for help. You don't ignore that." That was all he said before turning his back to the cameras. Later that afternoon, the police chief arrived at the scene, shaking his head at the chaos left behind. "Never seen anything like it," he said to the animal control officer. 50 bikers scaring off a bear? That's new. The officer nodded, kicking at the mud. Things probably halfway to the next county by now. They didn't kill it though, just scared it off. Gotta respect that. Respect, the chief echoed softly, watching the bikers mount their motorcycles again. As they prepared to leave, Mason caught sight of Amara standing beside a police cruiser, holding a stuffed animal someone had given her. She waved, small hand trembling. He raised a hand back, 2 fingers to his temple in a silent salute. Then 50 engines came to life once more, rumbling like thunder rolling over the hills. They didn't wait for interviews or applause. They simply rode off into the distance, back toward the open road, where their reputation had always lived, somewhere between fear and freedom. That night, as rain clouds cleared from the Oregon sky, Mary lay in a hospital bed with Amara asleep beside her. The monitors beeped softly. Outside the window, she could faintly hear the distant growl of motorcycles fading down the highway. Her eyes filled with tears, not of fear this time, but of wonder. In a whisper, she said, "Bandai, oitan kriem nan? God, you heard my cry." Amara stirred, murmuring in her sleep, "Mama, angels ride bikes." Mary smiled through her tears, brushing her daughter's curls away from her face. "Yes, baby," she whispered. "They do." By morning, the diner was quiet again. The truckers were gone, the mud beginning to dry, the forest still. But taped to the diner window was a handwritten sign. "Thank you, Hell Angels, for reminding us what courage looks like." That single night changed everything. The group that had been branded outlaws became something else in the public eye. Defenders, guardians, men who acted when no one else would. For once, the headlines didn't talk about their crimes or their pasts. They talked about their hearts. And though Mason Kane never watched the interviews or read the comments, he kept one thing with him: the sound of a small voice in the rain, crying for her mother. A sound that reminded him that even the roughest souls could be called upon to do something pure. The morning light crept softly through the thin hospital curtains, painting the room in shades of gold and quiet. The rain had passed, leaving only the scent of clean air and the faint hum of tires on wet roads outside. Mary Jean-Baptiste stirred slowly, her eyelids fluttering open. For a few seconds, she didn't know where she was. The white walls, the soft beeping of machines, the smell of antiseptic, it all felt too still, too safe. Then her eyes found Amara, curled up beside her under a pale blue blanket, breathing evenly, her tiny fingers clutching the edge of her mother's gown. Tears welled in Mary's eyes. She brushed the child's curls back and whispered, her voice breaking in Creole, "Bonne Messi? Thank you, God." It was over. The bear. The forest. The screaming rain. But before she could even take another breath, a low knock echoed at the door. Mary looked up. Standing in the doorway was Mason "Grizzly" Kane, his tall frame filling the entrance. His leather vest hung open, his beard still damp, and in his hands was a brown paper bag that smelled faintly of bacon and coffee. "Morning," he said quietly. Mary blinked, almost smiling through her exhaustion. "You came back." "Didn't go far," he replied, setting the bag down on the bedside table. "Brought breakfast. You both eat. We'll handle the rest." Mary's brow furrowed. "The rest?" "Your van. The cops towed it to the lot by the diner. We're fixing it up. Reaper and Tank are already on it." Her lips parted in disbelief. "You're fixing my van?" Mason shrugged. "It's seen better days, but so have we." He turned to go, but paused when he saw her tears. "You don't owe us anything," he said. "Just rest." Before she could respond, he was gone, boots echoing down the hall. 2 days later, Mary could finally stand. Her wounds were healing, her stitches clean. The doctors said she was lucky. A few inches deeper and that claw would have taken her arm. Amara had barely left her side the whole time. She colored pictures for the nurses, told anyone who'd listen about the motorcycle angels, and insisted that her mama was the bravest person in Oregon. On the third morning, when Mary stepped out into the hospital parking lot, she froze. Parked under the sunlight were 7 gleaming Harleys, lined up like black stallions. Their chrome caught the light, and beside them stood Mason and a handful of his riders, Reaper, Tank, Tammy, and Diesel. The moment they saw her, Tank grinned. "Well, if it ain't the toughest mama in the Pacific Northwest." Mary laughed softly, though her voice trembled. "You fixed it?" Reaper nodded proudly toward the far corner of the lot. "There she is." Mary turned, and her breath caught. Her old van, the rusted one that had sheltered her and Amara for months, looked new. The dents were gone, the paint scrubbed clean, the back windows covered with thick insulation panels to keep out the cold. Someone had even stuck a small pink sticker near the door, a cartoon angel riding a motorcycle. Amara squealed with delight. "Mama, look, it's ours again." Mary covered her mouth with both hands. "Mon Dieu." Mason stepped forward, tossing her a small key ring. "Should last a while now. And if it doesn't, we'll come fix it again." Mary blinked, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." "Don't have to say anything," Mason said. "We just did what was right." She looked at him, studying his weathered face, the lines of someone who'd seen too much and spoken too little. "But why help me? Why us?" He hesitated, glancing down at Amara, who was now tracing her fingers along the chrome wheels. Then he said simply, "Because somebody should have." That afternoon, the hospital released them. The bikers didn't let her walk out alone. They formed a quiet escort, engines rumbling low as they rolled slowly behind her van down the narrow road toward the diner. The small crowd gathered outside the truck stop watched in awe, some applauding, others snapping photos. Someone shouted, "You're heroes." Reaper just grinned and called back, "Don't start rumors." At the diner, a woman in scrubs stood waiting. She had kind eyes and a steady smile. "You must be Mary," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Valerie, Tammy's sister. I'm a nurse at the clinic nearby. You and your daughter are staying with me for now." Mary shook her head, startled. "We couldn't possibly." "You can," Valerie said gently. "My spare room's empty. And my son's away in college, so there's space. I insist." Tears filled Mary's eyes again. "I don't understand why everyone's being so kind." Valerie smiled. "Because you remind us what strength looks like." That night, for the first time in months, Mary and Amara slept under a real roof. Valerie's small cottage sat on the edge of town, surrounded by pines. The sheets smelled of lavender. The warmth of the heater hummed through the air. Mary lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening to her daughter's soft breathing beside her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw headlights, the roar of engines, men shouting through rain. But instead of fear, the memory now brought something new, safety. She whispered to herself in Creole, "Yo sovem Bandai. Yo sov nu. They saved us, God. They saved us." Over the next few days, the bikers kept showing up. Every morning, a new face appeared at Valerie's door, a rough voice calling, "Delivery for the Angel's Lady." Sometimes it was food, sometimes clothes. Once, it was a teddy bear almost bigger than Amar herself. Tank arrived one afternoon with a stack of groceries. "Figured you might want real meals," he said gruffly, setting them down. Mary smiled. "You didn't have to." Yeah, he muttered. "Just take it. My wife made cookies too. Don't tell the guys or they'll eat them all." Amara giggled as he handed her the bag. "Thank you, Mr. Tank." She grinned. "Anytime, kiddo." It didn't take long for the town to take notice. The same bikers who had once been whispered about, criminals, outlaws, men to be feared, were now being called guardians. Local reporters visited the diner again, this time to hand-deliver envelopes of donations from viewers. Within a week, they'd raised enough to pay Mary's medical bills, repair her van completely, and help her apply for new housing. But when the local news tried to interview Mason, he refused again. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Mary found him outside Valerie's porch, sitting on his bike, smoking quietly. The wind tugged at the edge of his jacket. "Still don't like cameras?" she asked softly. He smirked. "Not my style." "Why not? The world should know what you did." Mason exhaled smoke, watching it drift into the cool air. "Doesn't matter who knows. We didn't do it for fame." She studied him, her voice low. "Then why did you do it?" He turned to her, eyes calm but firm. Because that little girl ran through the rain screaming for her mama. And because somebody should have answered. Mary nodded, silent tears sliding down her face. As days passed, something like family began to form. Strange, loud, and unlikely, but real. The bikers would drop by Valerie's place for dinner. They'd sit on the porch, sharing stories over plates of stew. Amara would climb into Mason's lap, showing him her new drawings. One of a bear running away, another of motorcycles shining like stars. One evening, as they were leaving, Amara tugged Mason's hand. "Are you gonna keep helping people, Mr. Angel?" Mason chuckled. "If they need it." She nodded seriously. "But because Mama says real angels don't fly. They ride." Mason froze for a second, then laughed, deep and genuine. "Smart kid you got there." Mary stood in the doorway, smiling quietly. "Takes after her mama." Later that night, when everyone had gone and the cottage had gone still again, Mary sat by the window watching the moon rise over the pines. Her heart was full of gratitude, of disbelief, of a peace she hadn't known in years. She whispered a quiet prayer, "May the road be kind to them as they were kind to us." And from far off in the distance, she heard it, the faint, familiar rumble of motorcycles fading into the night. A sound that once terrified her now felt like a lullaby. By the end of that week, the quiet Oregon town that had once barely noticed Mary Jean-Baptiste could no longer forget her name. The story had exploded, literally overnight. Dashcam footage from a trucker passing the rest stop had been uploaded to social media, and within hours, it spread like wildfire. It showed the rain-soaked chaos, 50 bikers racing through a storm, headlights blazing through the forest, engines roaring as one. Then, the clip froze on the moment Mason, Grizzly, Kane lifted Mary into his arms, wrapping her in his jacket as the bear fled into the dark. The headline read, "Hell Angels Save Homeless Mother from Bear Attack." The irony of it all, Hell Angels turned saviors, was too powerful for the world to ignore. By morning, every major network wanted an interview. Talk shows called. Radio hosts debated. The story aired on national television, complete with dramatic retellings and emotional soundtracks. But Mason wanted no part of it. When reporters swarmed the truck stop the following day, microphones flashing, Mason stood with his hands in his vest pockets and said the only thing he would ever say publicly. "We ain't heroes. We're just men who didn't look away." Then he turned, started his bike, and left the cameras eating his dust. For Mary, the sudden attention was overwhelming. Reporters called her the Miracle Mother. Donations poured in from strangers across the country, cash, clothes, toys for Amara, and even job offers. The local shelter arranged an interview for her at a small bakery downtown. When she arrived, still shy and uncertain, the owner, a gray-haired woman named Evelyn, greeted her with a warm smile. "I saw you on the news," Evelyn said, wiping flour from her hands. "You're the one with the brave little girl." Mary blushed. "I was just trying to survive." "That's the kind of worker I want," Evelyn replied simply, handing her an apron. "You start Monday." Mary almost couldn't speak. "Thank you. I won't let you down." Evelyn chuckled. "Honey, you've already done the hard part. The rest is just dough and patience." Life, somehow, began to rebuild itself, slowly, delicately, like bread rising after being punched down. Every morning, Mary would wake before sunrise, dress quietly, and walk to the bakery. The smell of yeast, butter, and coffee greeted her like an embrace. Her arms still ached from the scars, but she didn't complain. Each loaf she baked felt like a small victory, proof that she was still here, still fighting. Amara started preschool soon after. On her first day, she wore a little yellow dress that Valerie had found at a thrift store. Her hair was braided neatly, tied with pink ribbons. As Mary watched her daughter disappear through the classroom doors, laughter echoing down the hallway, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not the desperate, flickering kind that kept you alive. The real kind. The kind that let you dream again. Sundays became sacred. Every week, like clockwork, the sound of engines rolled through town. The first time it happened, a few neighbors peeked out their windows nervously until they saw the familiar faces. The Hell Angels. They didn't just visit. They arrived like a celebration. The air would vibrate with the sound of Harley pipes and laughter. They'd park outside Mary's apartment, bringing bags of groceries, new clothes for Amara, or just themselves, loud, kind, and utterly unpretentious. Mason always stood a bit apart, leaning on his bike, watching with quiet amusement as Tank and Reaper played catch with Amara in the parking lot. One Sunday, she ran to him holding a folded piece of paper. "I made you something, Mr. Mason," she said, her smile so wide it made him blink. He knelt beside her as she unfolded the drawing. Crayon colors filled the page, bright yellows, deep greens, and streaks of red. It showed her mama standing by a van under a big golden sun. A bear was running into the woods, and beside them were 50 motorcycles drawn like shining guardians. Across the top, in crooked block letters, she'd written, "My Angels." Mason stared at it for a long moment. His throat tightened. "You made this for me?" he asked quietly. Amara nodded. "For all of you. 'Cause you saved us." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes right away. Slowly, he folded the paper and tucked it into the inner pocket of his leather vest. "Then I'll keep it close," he said. "Remind me what good looks like." In the following weeks, Mary found herself adjusting to her new normal. She'd laugh more often. Her back no longer ached from sleeping in a van. The lines around her eyes softened. At the bakery, her co-workers adored her gentle nature and her Haitian pastries, which she began teaching them to make, flaky patties filled with spicy meat or sweet coconut. The customers loved them. One afternoon, Evelyn patted her shoulder proudly. "See, Mary? You're not just working here. You're adding something beautiful." Mary smiled. "It's the first time I feel like I belong." But fame has a strange way of following even those who don't want it. A TV crew tracked down the bakery. They wanted to film her new life. When they asked if Mason would appear, she just shook her head. "He doesn't do cameras," she said. "He does people." They laughed, thinking it was a joke, but she meant every word. When she told Mason later that the news wanted another interview, he just smirked. "I already said what needed saying." "They want to call you heroes," Mary said softly. Mason looked away, his voice low. "Heroes are people like you. We just showed up." One rainy Thursday, after closing the bakery, Mary stepped outside and saw the familiar glint of chrome under a streetlight. Mason was waiting on his bike, his vest soaked but his expression calm. "You still working late?" he asked as she approached. "Someone's got to make sure the bread don't burn," she joked. He chuckled, then gestured to the extra helmet hanging from his handlebars. "Take a ride?" She hesitated, then smiled. "Why not?" The wind whipped through her hair as they rode down the coastal road, the smell of rain mixing with pine and salt. The hum of the engine wasn't frightening anymore, it was grounding. When they stopped at a cliff overlooking the dark sea, Mason turned to her. "You're doing good," he said. "So are you," she replied. "I see it, the way people look at your crew now. They don't see fear anymore." He shrugged. "Maybe they just needed to be reminded we're human." Mary smiled faintly. "Or maybe you reminded them what humanity looks like." He didn't answer, but his eyes softened. They stood there in silence, watching waves crash against the rocks below. The wind carried the faint echo of distant engines, like a song of redemption humming through the night. The next Sunday, the bikers came again, this time with a surprise. Reaper called Amara outside, grinning ear to ear. "Got something for ya, kiddo." He lifted a small bicycle from the back of his truck, shiny red, training wheels and all, with tiny plastic wings taped to the handlebars. Amara gasped. "It's beautiful." "It ain't a Harley," Tank teased, "but it'll do till you're old enough." Amara threw her arms around them both, giggling uncontrollably. Mary stood by the doorway, her heart so full it hurt. Mason caught her gaze and gave a small nod. "Told you," he said quietly. "You're family now." That night, when Amara fell asleep clutching her new helmet, Mary sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of tea. The rain whispered against the window again, the same rain that once terrified her. But now it sounded different, like applause, like forgiveness, like life beginning again. She looked at the drawing Amara had made, still framed on the wall. A bear running away. A mother standing strong. 50 motorcycles under a sun that never set. Her lips curved into a soft smile. "Maybe angels really do ride bikes," she whispered. From somewhere in the distance, faint but unmistakable, came the rumble of engines, her angels, riding through the night once more. The smell of warm bread drifted through the narrow hallway before dawn, curling up the staircase like a familiar hand reaching out to greet them. Mary Jean-Baptiste stood in the doorway of her new apartment, her heart so full it felt foreign, like she had borrowed someone else's happiness for a moment. The room was small, 2 bedrooms, a modest kitchen, and a window that looked down onto the bakery below where she worked. The walls were freshly painted, the wood floors creaked softly under her bare feet, and sunlight caught on the edge of a vase filled with wildflowers that a neighbor had dropped off the day before. It wasn't much, but to Mary and Amara, it was everything. Their home. At last. The move had been a blur of kindness. When the bakery owner, Evelyn, heard that an apartment had opened up above her shop, she called Mary before the listing even went public. "You and your little girl need a place that smells like bread in the morning," she said simply. The Hell Angels had handled the rest. Tank showed up with a truck full of donated furniture. Reaper carried boxes up the narrow stairs 2 at a time. Tammy, who could ride a motorcycle one-handed while painting with the other, helped color the walls with soft beige and sea green hues. And Mason, as always, stood back quietly, giving orders only when needed, his steady presence keeping everyone moving like a well-oiled machine. By the time evening fell, the apartment was transformed. Amara's tiny bed sat beneath a window framed by yellow curtains, and next to it was a wooden nightstand that Mason had found at a thrift store. On top, Amara placed her favorite drawing, My Angels, where the crayon suns seemed to glow even brighter under the lamplight. Mary leaned against the wall, tears threatening her again. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice trembling. Mason wiped sweat from his brow, glancing at her with that easy calm of his. "You just did," he said. "By smiling." The first night in the apartment, Mary barely slept, not because of fear, but because silence still felt unnatural. No howling wind. No rattling van doors. No rain dripping through leaks onto her face. Just quiet. She watched Amara sleeping peacefully, her chest rising and falling beneath the blanket. For years, Mary had survived in constant motion, crossing borders, fleeing danger, keeping her head down. Now, for the first time, she didn't have to run. The stillness was terrifying and beautiful all at once. When morning came, she dressed slowly, letting the rhythm of normal life sink in. The bakery below was already alive with sound, trays clattering, ovens opening, Evelyn humming as she prepared dough. Mary smiled to herself. The air smelled of coffee, sugar, and yeast, the scent of work, the scent of stability. She went downstairs and began her shift, tying her apron and greeting customers. Some recognized her from the news, others didn't, but they all smiled warmly. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel invisible. Later that afternoon, Mason arrived with 2 of his riders, hauling up the last of the donated furniture. When they finished, he lingered by the kitchen window, watching the street below. "Never thought I'd see the day we'd be hauling couches instead of chrome," he said with a half-smile. Mary laughed softly. "You're not so bad at it." He shrugged. "Don't spread that around. I got a reputation to keep." They both laughed then, a quiet, genuine sound that filled the room in a way no music could. When the laughter faded, Mason glanced around the apartment, nodding approvingly. "You did good here. Feels like home already." Mary's eyes softened. "It does. For the first time in a long time, it really does." As dusk settled, she brewed coffee for them both. They sat by the small window overlooking the street, the golden light fading behind the bakery sign. It was the first time she had ever been alone with him since that night in the forest. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was steady, comfortable. Mary looked down into her cup, her fingers tracing the rim. "I never told you why we were in those woods," she said finally. Mason leaned back, listening quietly. "I left Haiti when Amara was just a baby," Mary continued. "After her father, after he became violent. He was a good man once, but something broke in him when work dried up. When I finally found the courage to run, I took her and everything we could carry." Her voice cracked. "We came here for peace, but peace is expensive, Mason. And I couldn't afford it. We lost everything trying to start over. The van, that was all we had left." Mason said nothing, his eyes steady and kind. Mary wiped her tears quickly. "You probably think I'm foolish." "I think you're brave," he said quietly. "You crossed an ocean for your daughter. You faced a bear with a stick. That's not foolish. That's survival." She laughed softly, though it trembled. "I didn't feel brave. I felt like a mother trying not to die." He tilted his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "That's the same thing." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw not the leather, the tattoos, or the scars, but a man who carried other people's pain in silence. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me. For helping when no one else would." He stared out the window, the fading sunset reflected in his eyes. "You don't need to thank me, Mary. You'd have done the same for someone else. People forget that kindness ain't charity, it's duty." She nodded, the weight of his words settling in her chest. Over the following weeks, the apartment slowly came to life. Neighbors brought old furniture, potted plants, and groceries. The walls filled with laughter and the smell of freshly baked bread from below. Every evening, after closing the bakery, Mary would read Amara bedtime stories, sometimes in English, sometimes in Creole, while the faint rumble of motorcycles passed somewhere in the distance, like a lullaby wrapped in thunder. Amara would always ask, "Mama, do you think Mr. Mason's still riding?" Mary would smile. "I think he's always riding, Sherry." And Amara would grin sleepily. "Good. Then we're safe." One Friday evening, Mason returned with his crew, carrying buckets of paint and brushes. "You already painted," Mary said, laughing. "Yeah," Mason replied, smirking. "But Tank thinks the living room needs more color. Says it's too bakery beige." Tank grinned from behind him. "Gotta make the walls scream home, not hospital." Mary rolled her eyes but couldn't stop smiling. The men painted while Amara danced around, her tiny hands covered in blue and green streaks. By nightfall, the walls shimmered with soft shades of ocean and sunlight, colors that felt like hope itself. When it was done, Mason stood back, arms crossed. "Now that's a place worth coming home to." Mary stepped closer, her voice gentle. I think it already was. He smiled faintly. You know, you're not running anymore. She blinked. What do you mean? You stood your ground, against a bear, against fear, against everything that tried to break you. That's not running, Mary. That's winning. The words hit deep. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then she laughed quietly, shaking her head. You make it sound like I'm some kind of warrior. You are, Mason said simply. You just fight different battles. They shared a long look, not romantic, but profound. The kind that said more than words ever could. Something like friendship, maybe even healing, passed between them, invisible but real. Later that night, after everyone had gone, Mary stood by the window again. The town below was quiet, bathed in moonlight. The bakery sign flickered softly, the smell of bread still wafting through the cracks. She glanced around her small home, the painted walls, the second-hand furniture, her daughter's laughter echoing faintly from the bedroom. This was peace. Not the kind that came from silence, but the kind built by people who cared. She pressed a hand to her heart, whispering to the still air, home again. And far off, just as she closed her eyes, she thought she heard it, the distant rumble of motorcycles rolling along the highway. The angels were still out there. And for the first time in years, Mary felt safe enough to sleep. Spring came softly that year. The Oregon air, once soaked with rain and fear, now carried the sweetness of wildflowers and bread. The small town that had once known Mary Jean-Baptiste as that homeless woman at the diner now greeted her by name. Each morning, she'd open the bakery window and wave to passing cars while Amara, in her tiny school uniform, balanced a backpack almost too big for her shoulders. Life had a rhythm now, simple, beautiful, and hard-earned. But every Sunday, the rhythm changed. That was the day the ground would tremble again, not from storms or beasts, but from the familiar thunder of engines. It began like clockwork. From miles away came the low, rolling hum of Harleys, building slowly into a chorus of freedom. By the time the riders appeared on the main road, the whole town seemed to know what was coming. Children rushed to the sidewalks, waving flags and homemade signs that read "Thank you, Angels." Shop owners stepped outside their doors. Even passing drivers pulled over to watch the spectacle. 50 men in black vests, leather glinting in the sun, rolled through town not as outlaws, but as guardians. Their leader rode at the front, helmet gleaming, gray beard fluttering in the breeze. Mason, grizzly, Kane didn't wave or smile much, but his presence carried a kind of gravity that no words could match. Behind him, Tank revved his engine twice, making the children laugh. Reaper handed out candy from his saddlebag. Tammy, the only woman in the lineup, flashed a peace sign toward the bakery window. And up above, framed in the glass, Mary and Amara watched them pass. Mary leaned against the counter, flour dusting her hands, a quiet smile curving her lips. "They're here again," she said softly. Amara jumped off the stool, rushing to the window. "Can we go say hi, Mama? Please?" Mary chuckled. "Finish your homework first, little one." Amara pouted dramatically. "But they're my angels." Before Mary could answer, the bell over the bakery door jingled. The familiar scent of leather, oil, and wind followed Mason inside. "You sure this place sells food?" he teased, glancing around. "Smells too clean for my kind." Mary laughed, shaking her head. "You want the usual? Or are you here for more than donuts this time?" She grinned. "Can't a man check on his favorite baker?" "Favorite or only?" she teased. He didn't answer, just smiled and handed her a small paper bag. Inside were nuts, chocolate bars, and a folded envelope. "For the kid," he said. Amara ran up, hugging his leg. "Mr. Mason, guess what?" He looked down, feigning seriousness. "What?" I made another picture, she said, pulling a folded sheet of paper from her school bag. Mason crouched to her level, his big hands surprisingly gentle as he unfolded it. Crayon lines filled the page again, brighter this time, more confident. It showed her, her mama, and Mason standing under a sky full of wings and motorcycles. Around them were beams of light, and in the middle, Amara had written, in bold, uneven letters, "Angels do ride bikes." Mason stared at it for a long time. His eyes softened, the corner of his mouth twitching into the smallest smile. He didn't say much, he never did, but the silence spoke volumes. He folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his vest pocket, right beside the first drawing she'd given him months ago. "Think I'll need a bigger vest soon," he muttered. Amara giggled, her eyes sparkling. "You can hang it in your clubhouse." He smiled. "Maybe I will." Mary watched the exchange, her heart swelling. There was something about the way Mason looked at her daughter, not with pity, but with quiet pride. As if, somewhere along the road, this tiny Haitian girl had reminded him what purpose felt like. After the bakery closed that evening, Mary found Mason still outside, leaning against his bike. The sun was dipping low, setting the town aglow in orange and gold. "You ever get tired of riding?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. He looked at her, half smiling. "Only when I forget why I started." "And why did you?" He paused, as though the answer had been waiting for years to be said aloud. "Freedom, maybe. Anger too. But lately, I think it's peace." Mary nodded thoughtfully. "You found peace in a bike?" "In what the ride means," he said. "When you're on the road, all the noise fades. You stop thinking about who you used to be." She folded her arms, studying him. "And who were you?" He chuckled softly. "Someone running from himself. Guess that makes two of us, huh?" Mary smiled faintly. "Not anymore. You helped me stop running." Mason looked at her, not with the intensity of romance, but with the calm understanding of shared survival. "You stopped yourself," he said. "We just showed up when you yelled." She laughed quietly. "Still, you saved us." He shook his head. You saved me. You and that little girl of yours reminded a bunch of broken men what we're supposed to be." The words lingered in the air between them, warm as the fading light. As dusk turned to night, the rest of the crew rolled up one last time. They parked along the street, laughing and teasing each other, their presence now part of the town's heartbeat. Tank carried a box of pastries from the bakery, pretending to guard it. "These are for the road boss. Don't let the kids steal 'em again." Amara crossed her arms. "I only took one." "Uh-huh," Tank said, grinning. "Tell that to the missing dozen." Reaper leaned against his bike, tossing a coin. "You ever notice she gets away with everything around here?" Mason smirked. "She's 5. She earned it." Laughter rippled through the group, filling the night with warmth instead of thunder. When it came time to leave, Mason gave a small nod toward Mary. "We'll be around." She stepped forward, touching his arm lightly. "Be careful out there." "Always." And with that, he swung onto his Harley, the engine roaring to life. Amara waved furiously as the line of bikes began to move. "Bye, angels," she shouted, her voice echoing down the street. Tank honked twice in response. Reaper flashed a peace sign. And Mason, just before he disappeared around the corner, raised his hand briefly to his chest, then toward her. It was his way of saying goodbye. Later that evening, after the last motorcycle had vanished into the distance, Mary and Amara sat by the window together. The town was quiet again. The sky had dimmed to violet, and the scent of rain hung in the air. Amara leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "Mama," she whispered, "do you think they'll come back next Sunday?" Mary smiled softly. "I think they always come back. Maybe not here, but somewhere. Amara nodded sleepily. Because angels never stop helping people. Mary kissed her forehead. Exactly, Sherry. As Amara drifted off to sleep, Mary stayed by the window, gazing out over the rooftops. In the far distance, just as the wind shifted, she thought she heard it, the faint, rhythmic pulse of engines humming along the highway. Her lips curved into a quiet smile. That sound, once a storm of fear, had become her lullaby. Outside, the night deepened. Somewhere far beyond the hills, 50 bikes cut through the twilight, their headlights glowing like stars against the dark. The wind carried their roar across valleys and rivers, a promise that kindness could come from anywhere, that redemption could ride on two wheels. And as the engines faded into the night, the narrator's voice rose softly, like a memory carried on the wind. That night, 50 men once called sinners became saviors. And one small voice in the rain reminded the world that heroes don't always wear halos. Sometimes, they ride Harleys. The camera of the mind pulls back, over the glowing bakery, over the quiet town, over the winding Oregon highway bathed in moonlight. The final image is of Mason and his riders vanishing into the horizon, their silhouettes fading like echoes of thunder. The world falls silent. Only the sound of a mother's heartbeat remains, steady, safe, and free.
Thank you so much for staying with us till the very end of this story. What a journey it's been. From fear and darkness to courage and light. If the story taught us anything, it's that heroes can come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes they don't wear uniforms or carry titles. Sometimes they ride motorcycles and answer the cry of a child in the rain. It reminds us that kindness still exists in this world, that compassion can roar louder than danger, and that even when life pushes us to the edge, love, especially a mother's love, can still save the day. If this story touched your heart as it did mine, please support this channel by subscribing, liking this video, and sharing it with your friends and loved ones. Your support helps us keep telling these powerful, unforgettable stories of courage and humanity. And don't forget, we'll be back tomorrow with another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Until then, be kind, stay strong, and remember, angels really do ride bikes. Now, before you go, make sure to check out the previous story that's right here on your screen. Another tale of hope and heart that you'll absolutely love. See you in the next one. This is Tales of an Observer, where truth, dignity, and courage live on.